All right, we're here with ZM Wise, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Why are you a poet?
Certainly. Why am I a poet? Well, I didn't figure that part out until probably late high school. I've been writing since my first steps as a child, and I found myself writing in different forms, especially in poetry. Starting at the age of 6, except I didn't know what poetry was. They just taught us about it in school, and I didn't really absorb it really too much until the later years. You know, of course I read Jack Prelutsky, Ogden Nash, Shel Silverstein, the classic children's poets, and then growing up, started to get into Shakespeare and well, especially his sonnets. His poetry I prefer over his plays, believe it or not. But I digress completely. I'm a poet because that's my destiny. That's my true calling. Although I'm not relying on it for a living, because poets in general haven't made a decent living, unless you're John Ashbery. Since ever, but it's my first love. It's my, I guess the word passion would be an understatement in this case. That's how I feel about poetry. That's why I'm a poet. And I'm also a poet to spread the word that poetry is not dead. And my motto in life is that poetry lives. It lives within us all, whether you're a poet or not. So my motto consists of those two simple but hopefully powerful words. Poetry lives. Do not forget this.
Okay. Any mentors, teachers?
A few of them, actually. Dr. John Gorman, who works here and who will be retiring, he's what I consider a silent mentor, because he never taught me any methods personally, but after hearing him read, after hearing his love of language and poetry, some of my work began to take on a certain character, and I thank him for that. Definitely Mary Margaret Carlyle. I went to one of her workshops and I've seen her read. She's another silent mentor. But there are some who I ask for advice, and one of them is Dustin Pickering, who's been writing a lot longer than I have. And perhaps one of my greatest influences and mentors is my grandfather, Fred Weiss, who that's actually who I dedicated my first book of poetry to. He taught me pretty much all there is to know about writing and poetry, and then some. A lot of what I write, in a way, is kind of like Dustin. We're kind of like Pete Townsend's of poetry. It's really self-taught, but formal education never hurts. You need to include some of that, I think, and. But most of the time it is self-taught. I've just gotten little morsels of advice, and I apply those to my work, and it helps out a lot. I'm taking creative writing classes, but I don't put all of my formal education into my work. There are some MFAs out there, and a lot of them, that's how they learn best, But for me, I think it's a tiny bit of a tiny fusion. You cannot have knowledge without experience, and vice versa, whatever the case might be, even if it's not poetry.
What is poetry to you?
Poetry to me is like love. It's unlimited, it's vast. I don't really think it has a definition. Now, you ask any of the graduate scholars here, I'm sure they would love to beat me to death with that answer, but it comes from your heart. It can contain structure, and it also can't. Doesn't have to necessarily. I believe it is metaphorically becoming naked, exposing your soul on paper with words. Words are the pen is your sword, the paper is your shield, the words are your armor. And you must wear them well. So,
Is poetry important?
is poetry important?
Yep.
Based on what I've been saying for the last 30 minutes, no, it's stupid. Yes, it's extremely important to me, and like I said before, I'd like to spread the word as much as I can. You know, for goodness sakes, even my screensaver at work on my computer, it says "Poetry Lives" and with a bunch of exclamation points, all capital letters, large capital letters. There are some things that you don't want to spread around with large capital letters, but a phrase like that, it's universal. Doesn't matter who you are, poetry does live. It's important to teach it to your children early on, sort of like arithmetic, words and numbers. But, poetry, important would definitely be an understatement in this matter.
You said we should teach poetry to our children. What can poetry teach us?
Well, I believe it can teach us to have a more open mind about certain factors of life, whether social justice issues, maybe more open to the supernatural, the paranormal, things that cannot be explained, more open to nature, more open to looking at life a different direction and not just one. When you read a child's book, I swear to goodness, the imagination of a child, there are no boundaries. It's one of the most beautiful things I've seen. So, and I saw this poem that this child had written that Carmen showed me, Carmen Jacobson, and she showed me. And this child wrote, I kid you not, the sun is a basketball. The black lines are the rays. And I'm just like, the kid sees a basketball as the sun, and I'm thinking that's unlimited right there. That's beautiful, and you cannot take that away from a child. If a child thinks that the basketball is the sun, let it be so. Poetry, it can teach us definitely a more open mind. You cannot take everything literally in poetry. You just can't. And, for example, there's this part of the title piece, the Green Eight. Green Eight would like to amount to something that is much greater than himself. He consumes success and defecates aftermath results. Life was a southern country until the mountains made him their permanent home. 'Tis a happy exile, a much-needed hiatus following the magic bouncing sphere as lyrics are read slowly. This is Hyacinth House come true. Poetry isn't about reading it once. It's about the experience. And it's about reading it 3 or 4 times. That's why I'm still reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. Sure, some of it does sound more direct, and with any epic poem, there is a story behind it. But, of course, with an earlier piece like Gilgamesh, there is somewhat of a pattern of symbolism, but you tend to see it a bit more. Whereas you look at poetry today, symbolism galore is mostly all you see.
Poetry has had some historical moments. There's lots of poets that went out there in the past. They went out to protest rallies. They actually challenged things. Are poets asleep today? Are there any protest poets that are really going out there and actually being active and challenging hot button topics, or are we asleep?
Sleep, I'm sorry, what'd you say? There is some truth to every joke, so, somewhat. It depends on the issue that they are supporting. Me, as far as politics are concerned, I consider myself apolitical. Because all my life I've been told, pick a side, or you should pick this side, you should pick this side. So I said calmly, but sincerely, leave me the hell alone. I focus mostly on social justice issues, the ones that not a whole lot of people pay attention to, where a certain issue has a cult following. For me, I'm a full supporter of animal rights, definitely feminism, and but nothing radical. I don't support anything radical. If you want to get your point across, definitely do so. Don't go burning down buildings, because that's what's going to make you look like monsters, you know. Seriously, and the same thing goes for poetry. I'm a poetry activist. I really am. And I'll act in nearly any means necessary. But you don't want to exploit yourself in the negative manner, because, you know, there goes your one shot, you know. So I think it really depends on the person, on the poet, on what they're trying to get across. Oh, I also support anti-racism fully. We only have biological differences, you know, to hell with xenophobia, you know. There is no color, there is no race, there's just one species, you know. We're all culturally different, sure, but, you know, there is no different. And unfortunately, you know, Texas, you know, some certain areas, you know, whereas the rest of the world, you know, not really the most liberal. There's a lot of closed-minded, you know, still a lot of, you know, ghosts, if you know what I mean, you know. And it's sick. It is really sick. Then again, I was raised, you know, near Chicago, one of the most liberal areas I've ever been in. The only thing that they're not too crazy about is guns, so, you know, be prepared to karate chop those muggers. You know, I definitely take these issues serious, and I've written about all of these in my work. You know, feminism, animal rights, you know, poetry, anti-racism, and but the thing that's awful is that, you know, since I'm not in Austin, I don't get to read a whole lot of those in Houston. You know, it's definitely one of the more conservative areas of Texas, and Texas is a conservative state. Not trying to diss it or anything, it's just the sad fact. Whoops. There you go.